But I mean,
Yeah.
I think this is so good for you mentioned creativity. I talk a lot about creative wellness too, and actually the healing power of creative wellness. And there were like, many of us are created to be creative beings. And when we think of being creative, it's not just the artists that normally come to mind, the musicians and the painters, but the ability to be entrepreneurs requires a lot of creativity. The ability to hit a good golf shot when you're in trouble requires a lot of creativity. But if you're burnt out and you're at 100%, you're probably unlikely to sustain the consistent flow of what you need to be, producing. And so just, and again, it kind of comes back to this beautiful idea of the inner and outer success. It's almost like an inner movement of success that we really have to breed into this culture, that it's very tempting and so easy to look at the outer success because that's what everybody sees. So we mask ourselves and we take care of our bodies, and we feed our minds with a lot of, books and get the intellectual wellness in, but then there's a matter of the human spirit much deeper that I feel like it's often missing in that conversation, and why I in neurobiotheology really try to bridge the three, because we feel like all three needs to be there for full well-being. Like, what good is it to be well but not really holistic well-being at the forefront of it all? And I think bringing that into the workplace is so important. So when we haven't really fully heard your definition of dharma. We've talked about it at length. What's your kind of simple explanation of how one should view dharma?
Yeah, the simple definition is the alignment of who you are and what you do. When you are bringing who you are to what you do, whatever that thing is, you are in your dharma, right? And so it doesn't mean, you have to go do anything that is extraordinary, or even, something that you believe is extraordinary. It can be done in everyday events. The way that I literally clean up the dinner table, after we're done as a family dinner, I can be in my dharma doing that, because I'm bringing who I am, the spirit of who I am, to that act of clearing dishes. Um, and so when we feel those two things are aligned, we start to come alive in a brand new way. And again, these everyday things can start to have more meaning for us because we're bringing ourselves to the equation. But we on the flip side, you could have the most exciting, extraordinary job in the world
Right.
and feel like you are not bringing who you are to what that is, right? So a lot of the leaders that I coach right now are on paper extraordinary, right? I mean, some of the most sought after people, in business, but they're not quite happy with what they're doing, right? And part of the reason for that is because who they are and what they do each day, they don't feel like they're in alignment. And in some ways, and we talked about creativity here just a minute ago. I kind of look at this as a sort of like, an old fashioned transistor radio, where you sort of had to tune the channel, right? You had to tune it just right in order to receive, right? And if you did it just right, you would receive the right signal and you would be giving the right signal, right? And you, in some ways, are the radio, right? And your job is to tune things the right way, right? And part of the reason that we talk about things like the 85% rule, slowing it down just a little bit, is because if we're too entrenched, when we're too focused, too intense, the channel, the frequency is just off, right? So we're getting stuff done, but we're not necessarily playing the type of music that we want to be playing. We're not receiving the type of information and signal that we want to be receiving. And so sometimes these little tweaks can sort of be like magical. You're literally turning the knob just a little bit and you start to realize, oh, like this can feel a lot better. This thing that I'm doing, I don't have to leave it. I don't have to abandon my life in order to transform the way that I live. I can make these little tweaks. So, like, just for example, for me, one of the things that became apparent is like I wasn't spending enough time listening, and not just listening to others, but listening to myself. So when I started a journaling practice, I would literally sit down in the mornings and I would write one thing at the top of the page. And that one thing was, what will you have me know? And I don't even know who I was really talking to, right? Was I talking to God? Was I talking to the source? I was talking to something that was not me, but I just wrote, what will you have me know? And the words would just start to flow. They would just start to flow. All this advice would come to me. And it was about relationships, not just with my work, but it was relationships with my wife, with my kids, the way that I engage with my community. All these insights would come to me. And all I needed to do was I needed to listen. So just tuning for me, this act of journaling was just tuning this knob just a little bit. It was literally 15 minutes each morning doing that, would tune it a little bit so that I could actually receive the right signal. And then as I was receiving the right signal, then all I needed to do was open the channels. If I opened the channels, I could start expressing that in a much more authentic way. Same job, same deadline, same meetings, but I was bringing more of who I was to what I do.
The concept of this dial and you journaling reminds me a lot of these ancient practices that we can now kind of resurrect and bring into, modern wellness practices, through apps and what have you. There's a lot of great aids out there, and we're building a platform
Yeah.
now for that.